So it seems like that certain things were unclear about permissions, and this is maybe a good opportunity to actually clarify it a little bit, to kind of explain how things actually work in Android. So we have the security model that Android is based on, and the basic security model basically says, look, one app cannot do anything that's potentially dangerous, and by potentially dangerous we mean it cannot intrude on other apps' data that would be affecting privacy. It cannot do things that potentially cost money, like making phone calls or sending SMSs or using your internet, and so on, right? The model for holding this true is to sandbox the applications, right? So each app is its own process, its own sandbox. Nothing in the world can intrude into its security, right? So that's how it works. So this is what an application sandbox looks like, right? You know, just yet another picture of what we've been talking about all along, right? You basically have, this is an app. It's based on a Linux process. On top of it, there's a Dalvik virtual machine, which then runs any number of activities, services, receivers, and providers. You can have any number of these. You know, we right now have 2 activities, 2 services, and 1 receiver, right? That's where we're at right now. Pretty mixed bag app. In addition to that, you may have some permissions, you may have some libraries, you may have some databases, some files, some resources, right? Just like, to put it a little bit in a perspective, let me see. So if I do Adb Shell, right? So if I do a PS, you can see that all the apps actually do run as separate processes, right? You can see that my Yamba app runs here under some UID called app40. Some made-up UID. So each app is basically being assigned a UID at creation time. What command? So you could type, if you want to do it all in one, you could do adb space shell space ps. Or adb shell just gets you into the shell of your device, and then you're on your own, right? It's just basically a Linux, very scaled down, right? Wow.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, I usually restart it twice in a month.
I started once in 3 years.
Oh, it'll be an interesting uptime. So, if you look at, if we now do, if I do Adb Shell, if I go into, if I look at PS, right, and we said our app is running as app40, if I go to that secret directory, data, right, ls-l, so ls-l, right, so you can see that each directory is actually owned by their respective both user ID and GID, group ID. So there's mine. So that's how Linux keeps tab on security. It doesn't allow anyone else to basically intrude on the privacy of another app, right, on the data of another app. Now, we are root users. That's why we're allowed to now just go and poke around Yamba, to poke around that folder, right? pwd, I mean that folder, do that ls-l, and so on and so on. I can go to shared libraries and do ls-l. I can do cat star, and I can print out the value of the username, password, and so on and so on. So far, so good. So that's the basic model. Now, the reason why we were talking about this is once in a while you want to break this model. You want to allow somebody to act, to do certain things, right? And you do that via uses permissions and permissions, right? So when somebody says, I require permission, okay, then somebody to access that somebody, the user needs to say uses permission and be okay by the user. It's kind of like a yin and yang, right? They need to match, right? So, broadcast receiver. boot receiver already defines requires permission, right? So when you say permission, it's already implied to receive that notification. It already implies that. So you need to have users permission. So we do that on the app level, right? That's what, if you look at the code, that's what we did here. We said our app requires to be notified on the boot receive completed notification, and it's on the app level. It's not on a component level. I know that I could have also within this guy defined a permission. Sorry, within this guy I could have done permission. Okay, that would be equivalent of requiring permission. Okay, let me give you an example of that. That's maybe a different example that actually is more makes sense. Refresh service, right? Check this out. Well, let me do it like this. I'm gonna create, you guys were confused about permissions and users permission. I'm gonna create a brand new permission. I'm gonna give it a name, and the name can be arbitrary. I'm gonna call it com.example.permission and then make up or maybe com.example.yamba.permission, and I'll make up some refresh. That's a permission. I get to define other things. That's a name, label, icon, permission, group, description, and protection level. The only one that I actually need is a protection level. I'm going to say this is a dangerous thing to do. Okay? So I just define a permission. By defining it doesn't mean I do it. It doesn't do anything. I define it. I let there be a permission, you know, to launch a nuke, right? Now, so somebody needs to say, I'm the nuke, I request that permission. So let's say our refresh service now is no longer anyone can access and launch refresh service. I can now say permission, and then I need to match this letter by letter, right? So copy paste that, right? Permission, that, Control Shift F to reformat. Okay. So if I rerun this on my device, by the way, slide to this side to unopen, the other side for camera. If the camera is on, you probably slide to the other side. All right. So let's see. Yamba, menu, refresh. Adb log cat. Oh. Well, in this case, it's all part of my same package, so things are actually the protection dangerous is automatically given. Because we are defining the permission, my package already has it. But if somebody else wanted, let me do this. Hello world, remember hello world? I'm really quickly gonna whip together something in hello. Oops, I'm gonna do hello world wants to start. Remember how we can really quickly do buttons? So public void on click VUB, right? Organize imports. And I'm gonna do start service for new intent. This comma this is not gonna work. Yeah, this is not gonna work this way. I can pass the string. I can call it like this. I can say com.example.yamba.refresh service. I'm not expecting you to follow this. It's more just a little FYI on how this works. That's more an explanation than anything else. But organize imports. When it comes to intents, there are like a couple of ways to do intents. One of the ways to do intents is to do them via, from this context to that class. That works great. That's an explicit intent, and that works great when you're within an application. Now we're not inside of an application. So this application has no knowledge about, Yamba service and all that stuff, right? So the other way to do it is to make up a piece of text. This is a made-up piece of text. It could be Mickey, it could be anything, right? But for readability reasons, this is usually how people do it, right? Now, that's gonna fail. For it to work, Yamba actually, did I call this refresh service? I did. Yamba actually needs to filter for that. So we would need an intent filter with an action, with a name, with that name. So if you want to call something by its name, as opposed to its class, you have to do it, you have to provide the intent filter. And then you can invoke it by name. Make sense? So let me first run the Yamba to reinstall it with this modification. And now I'm going to run the hello world. Oh, I guess I'm missing a button, right? It's all details. I don't think Hello World actually has the right button. I want to put a button, and I wanted this button to have on click. Oh. It's some leftover from Hello World when we were showing stuff around. So Android on click equals on click. So that's the binding, right? See, this crashed, right? So that crashed because it was a security exception. Not allowed to start service, intent, blah, blah, without permission, com example Yamba permission refresh. Right? Make sense? So now if I did want to have this guy use it, so now this guy could go into manifest file and it could say, I'm using that permission. Right? Android name, and then I need that text that we defined. So it's the name of this permission that we defined here. So this is a permission that this guy now wants to use. So we're reinstalling it. Click on button. This time it didn't crash, and actually there's our data, right? Make sense? So basically what I've just done is I defined some kind of permission. It doesn't matter. I define it in this app. And I say, this guy requires that permission. You want to touch my service, you got to be approved. Right? This guy now says, all right, can I please, user, have that permission? And that's how they match. That's what the difference between permission and user's permission. Right? You're mostly going to be using other people's permissions, but that's how permissions work. And the system, like you guys know, has a whole bunch of default permissions built in. You need a permission to access course location, find location, that's your Wi-Fi, that's your GPS, right? Network state, Wi-Fi state, battery, cell phone camera, install other apps, access internet, this is the one we already had experience with, write external storage. So these are some common, permissions that are out there.
Can you show me the manifest on the Yamba again?
So in Yamba, we define a permission, and then in the service, we said this one requires a permission. The other components don't. So if somebody wants to launch the activity or wants to launch a receiver or launch the update service, this one is not protected. This one is open to the world, right? So yeah, so you can, that's the easiest. That's like a blanket coverage of one of the main building blocks. So you can just say requires permission by saying permission blah, right? Now, permissions also come in different shapes and sizes. The protection level is one of the 4 things. It's either, and if I do control space, you see the 4 things, right? So it's normal, dangerous, signature system. Normal means it's a low risk. A user often doesn't even need to be asked for it. It's kind of like granted. It's more like, hey, there's something going on here. Dangerous means user needs to be prompted. That's the stuff when you download Angry Birds and it says, I need to write to your external storage. It's a dangerous permission, right? That's why it's asking you to do that, right? Signature means that only apps that are signed with the same key are allowed to access this component. So, for example, if you want to create a federation of apps, right? Many apps running, being a whole, right? Like you may have one app doing one thing, another app doing another thing. Then you may want to do that, just a signature-based protection level, or signature system, which is basically based on if an app is installed in the system partition or assigned with the same key, it's good enough. So we trust stuff that's in a system partition because that's baked in it's in the factory, so it's really unlikely that the virus got there, unless the factory ships bad stuff, right? So that's how that works, right? So dangerous is probably the most common. The other most common would be, like I said, when you do a federation of things. And let's see, Android out. Did I have my diagram on Yamba? Remember our design for Yamba? This is a different, remember how I should walk you through the design, right? This is the design of Yamba using breaking things apart. So ultimately it ends up being something like this. So we break it into various APKs, various applications. We want to keep the client separate from the data, separate from services, and so on. Why? Maybe you're building some really bigger system, like things in Android work that way quite a bit, right? They break an app into multiple apps, right? So in this case, you may want to use that signature-based permission, right? So here I kind of had one Yamba for just UI, another Yamba to deal with all the services, like web services, another Yamba to deal with data. Yeah, which is a different design that I did. It's done for somebody who does they need to break it apart and build a much bigger system. So that makes sense. That answers the permission question. What it means to add a permission. So that the question was originally what happens if we add a permission to boot receiver, right? To add a permission. And that basically means you're just adding a permission that whoever calls it is going to have the permission. So, but we don't need that in this case. Yeah.
One more question. When the boot actually completes, the application is not running.
Yes.
The manifest only says that we want to receive, but our code is not running. So somebody runs the application?
Yeah. So in the boot complete, so when the app is installed, when you install the app, and that happens, by the way, every time you click run, right? When the app is installed, this manifest file gets analyzed. Something says, oh, look, you got an application. Oh, look, this application has an activity. Oh, look, this activity wants to get, now you guys know what this means, right? Wants to get, this activity is the main entry point for the application, and it should be added to the launcher, which is basically your drawer where you pick the apps, right? Okay, so now we know that. Oh, look, there's another preference activity. Oh, look, there's another service. Oh, look, there's a service that requires permissions and responds to this message, right? So this gets parsed at install time, it gets parsed at install time, and at that time, what happens is this is registered somewhere. So from now on, we know that that when, for example, this when this happens, this guy needs to get notified, and so on. Right? So it's analyzed at boot time. At install time. So when we finish booting, the system already knew who wanted to know about this, and subsequently it's actually going to start our application.